it's me, Alex, a stay-at-home reader. This month I'm gonna try to do a thing, to bring you my March wrap-up. Um, I had tried filming a sit-down wrap-up video. It was awful. I rambled, kind of forgot what I wanted to say, what are words, couldn't remember anything about the books, so I trashed it. And what I'm gonna do instead is just give you some clips of my kids throughout the week, kind of vlog style, just us hanging out, enjoying the outside because spring has sprung, and kind of using my Instagram reviews to recap what I read this month, because Instagram tends to be where I am more coherent with what I read, and my YouTube videos end up being rambly. So here's what I read in March. Tell the Machine Goodnight by Katie Williams. This is a book set in the near future, and in this near future there is a machine that is able to analyze a cheek swab and tell the person taking this test exactly what steps to take to find happiness. And the main character is Pearl, who works for Apricity, or the company that owns this technology. And she is 100% bought in, buys the company line. And yet, in her own personal life, she seems very far from content. Like this deep sadness in various aspects of her life. So from my Instagram review, sometimes humorous, often sad, this book explores ethics and suggestibility in a format that felt kind of like reading connected short stories as opposed to a novel. The chapters were each quite long and changed perspective among a cast of main characters at different points in their lives. By spanning several years, we also get to see technology change both in its nature and the way it's utilized. We get to see society becoming more and more a sort of capitalist utopia, and by that I obviously mean a dystopia. I really enjoyed this book, but like I said, it felt more like a bunch of short stories building off one another, and I would have preferred to stay closer to a main character and a single timeline instead. The Color of a Dog Running Away by Richard Gwynne. This one I actually have a Deweython reading vlog filmed and on my channel, so I'll link that below. Basically, I thought this book was obnoxious, egotistical, misogynistic, and yet intriguing. So from my Instagram review, despite my annoyance with the writing, I was bought into the story by the series of coincidences the novel opens with, and then the mysterious religious cult element that arises halfway through, which is not a spoiler because it's on the back cover. The story opens with Lucas, a translator living in Spain's Gothic quarter, receiving a mysterious postcard with a time and date stamped on it. He decides to go to the meeting spot with no other information, ends up meeting Nuria, who is essentially a manic pixie dream girl. The setting is full of eccentric characters, as well as a mysterious sect of modern-day Cathars who end up abducting the couple. There was not a single likable character. A ton of drug and alcohol use, which I usually don't like reading. And the ending felt kind of tedious and repetitive. And yet, the underlying plot kept me engaged enough to want to see it through. This month, my book club read The Talented Mr. Ripley, and while I wasn't able to join the meetup because my son had a baseball scrimmage, I did end up finishing the book. The story follows an American scam artist, Tom Ripley, who accepts an all-expenses-paid trip to Europe in exchange for convincing an acquaintance of his, Dickie Greenleaf, to return home to New York and enter his family's boat-building business. And Tom is basically a sociopath. He becomes obsessed with Dickie, his lifestyle and means, and Tom will do absolutely anything to avoid returning to his own inconsequential existence and low social standing. I was reminded a lot of Dorothy Hughes's In a Lonely Place, which I read for Shorty September last year, because both books put us directly inside the mind of an unhinged narcissist. Patricia Highsmith did a great job at writing an unreliable narrator whose delusions were so obvious it was almost funny. So every time Tom Ripley talks about how his actions make sense or how he's being perceived by others, I got the strong sense that it was actually quite the opposite, and I found that pretty funny. Knowing that there is a series of Ripley books kind of spoiled for me how things would end. I have seen the movie when it came out, I believe back in 1999, but I don't actually remember the movie. It was more the fact that I know there are 2 books following this one. I kind of had an idea how things would turn out, but the story still managed to keep the tension very high up until the end of the book. Next, I have a couple of middle grade books that I actually read with my kids. First is Jinxed. This sci-fi middle grade is about a girl whose dream is to get a place in the big tech school to become an engineer for Manticore. In the society imagined up by Amy McCulloch, people were rescued from their dependence on smartphones by the creation of mechanical animal devices that leash to a port behind the ear and perform all the duties of a personal assistant with the intense emotional connection of a pet. As you can imagine, there's a lot of ethics involved as to how far the tech can and should go, along with a good deal of corporate espionage, school secrets, and some coming-of-age young teen drama. I liked that it was a children's version of The Circle by Dave Eggers, but I don't think my kids really picked up on the big tech danger tone. Next, we read The Parker Inheritance, and this was amazing. It is about 2 kids solving a riddle over their summer vacation that was designed to force the southern town that they live in to acknowledge its history of racism and violence. So based on the cover, it looks like a cozy puzzle book for kids, but it goes deep and it doesn't hold back, while managing to remain appropriate for an upper middle grade reader. I found a lesson plan to go along with this book for my kids and we were able to make a whole American history and social studies homeschool unit out of reading this. It's very inspired by the Westing game, so Oliver and I actually ordered ourselves a copy to read that book as well. And Garvey's Choice is a novel in verse about a boy who is picked on at school for his size and then made to feel bad at home for his disinterest in sports. With encouragement from some friends, he ends up joining the school choir and learns to express himself that way with that newfound self-confidence. This was suggested reading to go along with The Parker Inheritance, as it builds on themes of friendship, identity, and acceptance. I got through 4 audiobooks this month. The first was This Is How You Lose the Time War. And I actually didn't love this one, even though I had high hopes. I've heard glowing reviews over the past few years. But I did find it interesting. This is a futuristic Romeo and Juliet type love story that takes place actually mostly in the past. It is a semi-epistolary novella following 2 elite soldiers who leave messages for each other as they travel through centuries and universes, trying to subvert each other's effects on civilizations. I would have preferred more world building or kind of like a setup to let me know more about the Time War and the sides that they're fighting for, but that wasn't the focus of this book at all. It was more about the relationship that the 2 characters build while being completely at a distance from each other the whole time. And then I listened to Finna, and this reminded me of a combination of Grady Hendrix's Horror Store and Seanan McGuire's Wayward Children Portal Fantasy series. It is about Ava and Jules, who after a very recent breakup are sent through parallel universes to recover an elderly shopper who has wandered into a wormhole that opened up in the IKEA-like store where they work. I found this book to be very entertaining. Really appreciated the representation included in the book, and it was kind of a fun horror. I feel like not too dark, not too scary. I listened also to The Cat Who Saved Books, and this was another flop for me. This is about a young man who is grieving the death of his grandfather and taking over working or shutting down the used bookstore that his grandfather owned. A talking cat shows up and tells him that he needs to come save books from mistreatment. It was kind of reminding me of the film Spirited Away, and so in that way I found it charming. But the mistreatment that the books needed to be saved from were things I do myself. So I found the book to be kind of preachy and very heavy on this message of the proper way to love books, and I'm not having it. And then lastly, I listened to, with my kids, Count Dooku, Jedi Lost. This is kind of like a graphic audio, where it is made to be listened to, not read. And it gives us the story of Count Dooku and what led him to becoming a Sith Lord in the Star Wars universe. Backstories of the villains are some of my favorite parts to the whole Star Wars universe. So I really enjoyed that. Not only do we get Count Dooku's turning to the dark side, but we also get a point of view of Asajj Ventress and her becoming an assassin under Count Dooku. And she's one of my favorite characters from the Clone Wars series. And lastly, I finally finished A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara. I started this in March 2021 for March of the Mammoths, and I got through about 680 pages. So here we are 2 years later, picked it back up, and I didn't have to go back at all. I remembered every single traumatic event, every single flawed character had stuck with me over the past 2 years. And I didn't end up liking it, which is pretty frustrating. I know this is a beloved book on YouTube and TikTok and Instagram, all over social media, really. I think I was better off not having finished, because when I put it down, I was in an okay place with the book. I had some issues. I found some problems with it. By the end, the last 200 pages that I came back to in March actually ruined the entire book for me. So, yikes. And that's it for March. Thanks so much for watching. See you soon.